Hello and welcome to yesterday's Airlines. Now in front of you in this video you can see the two most recently announced molds from ngmodels, which were the TU204-100 and the TU204-300. And in this video I want to discuss what NG should be doing next. Now there's a huge amount of opinion in this space, so I don't expect everyone to agree with my opinion, but nonetheless I'm going to try and use some measures to discuss, where they should be perhaps aiming their new mold creation in the future. So I'm going to split this video into two, and the first part we're going to look only at narrow bodies, and I'm going to use the information that has been given to me by other collectors when they've asked for new molds, when I've read on the forums and on Facebook and other places. So I'll pick the most commonly asked for molds and have a look and see, whether I think that they should be molds that NG is actually looking at creating in the scale. So let's move on and look at some narrow body molds in 400 scale and think about whether they need more representation from NG. Okay, so you can see behind an array of narrow body molds from various brands over the years, and these are some of the types that we're going to have a look at and say, are these molds good enough? Should they be remade? And if they should be remade, should they be remade by NG models? So we're going to look at more molds than you can see in frame here, and in fact I'm going to start with the most modern of these, which is the Airbus A320. Now the A320 is amazingly common in service. Obviously it's also hugely common in 400 scale, and almost all the manufacturers have one of these. Now it should be easy enough for NG to create themselves an A320 since they've got an A321. Having said that, there are some really good molds available. Primarily this Panda version is probably my favorite, but also the Aeroclassics mold is good. Though perhaps lacking obviously aerials and such. And then you've got Phoenix, which has a passable A320, and Gemini and jcwings, which sometimes has a passable A320 depending on the version. Do I think that we need more A320s in 400 scale? Not really. There are so many made, and there have been a huge number made. Now I would like to see some classic A320s made from early operators, and maybe even remade, because some of the old Aeroclassics are hard to find. But realistically, I think that the A320 is pretty well covered. So from a coverage perspective, do I think the A320 is really needed? No, I don't think it is. From a mold quality perspective, this is a stonking good mold, and the Aeroclassics, which pretty much shares the same features, is a good mold as well. The Phoenix isn't bad. Realistically, you've got 3 decent molds and 1, okay, sometimes mold. No, I don't really think there's a desperate need for it. So it's not scoring high from my perspective, though of course from a sales perspective I imagine A320s would do well. Personally, I'm not seeing the need. The molds are okay, and most of the content has been done. So not a high score for me. If I was going to give this, out of 3, whether NG should be making new A320, I'm going to give this a 1 out of 3. I don't think they should. Moving next, let's get a lot older and let's look at the old 707s. Here we've got a 707-100 and an early 707-300 turbojet version. Should NG be making these models? Well, they're a lot more historically important than an A320, let me tell you. They're also haven't been looked at in years. Both of these molds you're seeing here are really old. The Dragon is the only 707-100 in the entire scale, and that Aeroclassics is pretty much the only turbojet 707 as well. They're both really old molds, and they're not dreadful, but they weren't used particularly widely, and there's a lot of aircraft that didn't get made on these. Plus, there's a lot of small version changes that you could easily implement by changing the height of the tail, adding different stabilizers under the rear fuselage. You could make different versions. It would be really cool and exciting to have 707s, which represent the early phase of jet airliner development, and it's a really important area of the scale which is missing from a historical perspective. So should NG be making 707s? Now that's a good question, because really I think Aeroclassics would be better off making these 707s. So I'm not entirely certain. I think that, yeah, we haven't really got the molds, we haven't got the diversity. It's historically important. I think they'd still okay, actually. And even though I wish Aeroclassics would make them, yeah, NG I'm sure will do a good job. So I think if I'm looking at a 3, then I'm going to give these a 2 out of 3 for making new turbojet 707s. I'd like them, and I'd certainly buy any that were made. Now moving on to other narrow bodies that you can see in the background here, we're moving on to 727, and quite a few people have their B, or have a B in their bonnet about the Aeroclassics 727s, which make up the majority of 727 releases, certainly in recent times. Personally, I don't. Yeah, they're not perfect. A few molds are. They are good. They have some failings. The 100's pretty good, and they're mainly in the tail region. People especially get upset about the tail cone on the 200. But these are really widely used molds. They're really well used molds. They're quite handsome. I've got a load of them, and I certainly wouldn't be looking to replace them all. For me, it's just not that important. They've been well used. Aeroclassics continues to use them well, and the molds already look quite nice. So for me, no. I think that they've been well used. The molds are okay that we've got. Do they need to be replaced? Nah. So just like the A320, for me, if we're scoring out of 3, do we need new 727s? No. I'd say 1 out of 3. I don't think we do need new 727s in 400 scale. Okay, next up, we've got the 757, and I'm not talking the Series 200, I'm talking the 300, but I don't actually own any 757 300s, so because they're never really fit inside my admittedly enormous collection criteria. So I've got a 200 out here just to show you. This is also the old Gemini version. But there are a couple of existing 757-300 molds. Gemini and Dragon have both had molds. They haven't been enormously used, especially in recent years. They're both a bit old-fashioned. And certainly I could see some value in having a new 757, especially seeing as NG have already got the 200, and you think, again, increasing the length would be relatively easy. There's not a huge number of liveries, but there is still a decent number, and mainly of modern and major airlines that would sell well. You've got the licensing question, obviously, especially around Delta. But yeah, I don't know. You know, I think that the 757-300 would be a decent bet. You've got a couple of old molds, you've got a decent livery selection, you've got good sales potential, and it's not been well covered in recent times. So I would say that if you're looking at a 757-300, then should NG be looking at it? Yeah, they probably should. And this is probably quite high up the listings, I think, especially since they've already got a 200. So I'd say out of 3, I'd give this one a 3. I think the 757-300 would make some logical sense for NG to be attacking in the near future. Okay, 2 more to go. And these 2 are personal faves of mine, so let's have a look. Firstly, we've got the DC-910, the first and smallest variant of the DC-9. This mold you're looking at here is a JetX mold. It was made only for JetX. It was used slightly by JC, but in the very early days, not really. It's actually a good mold. Who knows where it is? It's vanished. It was used like 6 or 7 times and never used again. It is super, super frustrating when that happens, especially when the mold is actually not bad. The only thing that's bad about this mold is the fact that it has had this kind of hot rod appearance where it's a little bit down at the nose, but it's a good mold. Now, almost all the DC-910s that have been made in 400 scale have been made by Aeroclassics, and they were made way back at the beginning of 400 scale. They got screw bellies, some of them are even decaled. They are way out of date with what is available in 400 scale today, and they don't fit in with the rest of your fleet. There's a huge potential for DC-910s. They were operated by so many airlines over the years, mainly from North America, but also around the world, South America especially. And hey, they're desperately needed. There's almost none in 400 scale, and those that do exist are incredibly old. There's this diverse range of liveries. It's quite an important type. You know, the first DC-9, which had this entire lineage of aircraft following it, I think they'd sell well, obviously mainly with older collectors probably, but I think they'd sell well. And I think that, you know, this is a clear, yes, it needs to be made. Should it be made by NG? Arguably, it would be better coming from Aero Classics, who have spectacular DC9 molds already, but they're not showing a lot of interest. So I think that this one should probably be made by NG because, you know, no one else seems interested in making it, and therefore I'm going to give it 3 out of 3. I think that if DC910 is one of the most important aircraft that needs to be remade in 400 scale. And really, it's only surpassed by one type, and that is, certainly in the narrowbody arena, that is the MD-80. Now, this is a Gemini release from a few years ago. They've got a mould. It's an okay mould. It's not winning any awards. It's not dreadful by any means. And they never use it, or they use it like once in a blue moon for something like Aero Mexico travel. I don't really understand this. It doesn't make a lot of sense. We're crying out for MD-80s. It is one of the most important aircraft types from the 1980s and 90s and into the 2000s. It served with a huge range of major airlines, many of which are US, but also had a decent showing in places like China and obviously across a huge swathe of Europe. Nobody has made so many obvious MD-80s that would sell like hotcakes. Alitalia, SAS, Swiss Air, you know, Delta only got one very recently. So it's incredible that you just don't have these MD-80s available in this scale, and I just don't understand why nobody is pumping out AirCal, Frontier, TWA, so on and so forth, but they're not. So should ngmodels be looking at this? They really ought to be looking at an MD-80. Of all the models that I've talked about in this video so far, this one has got a poor history of mould usage, relatively ordinary molds as well. It's got a vast range of liveries. It's a seminal type for the period that it was operating in, which is 30, 40 years almost. It would sell super well. It has to be up there, high up there on the top. So for me, this is another 3-star, you know, model that should be remade. If we're looking at narrow-body jets, then for me, of the ones I've looked at here, the most obvious types to get made is the MD-80, the DC910, and a 757-300. Now, I'm sure that there are other jets that, you know, have never been made before, but these guys are all got good sales potential. They've got weak existing molds, and I think that they really deserve a lot of attention. So hopefully, you know, you guys agree. I tell NG this sort of stuff, obviously, and other collectors talk about it a lot. It's always interesting to see what they're going to do, and I don't think they necessarily listen to me. But at the same time, it can't hurt to talk about this, you know, where NG should be heading next, or Aero Classics, or your favorite manufacturer, and what sort of molds they should be looking at. For me, it is the MD-80, the 753, and the DC910. And, you know, thanks very much for watching. I'm going to be doing a second part of this video and looking at the wide body molds, so keep a lookout for that. Subscribe to the channel if you like the video. Obviously, check out my Instagram at YesToAirlines and my Facebook. And always, always keep an eye on the site. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Until next time, see you later.